This is Cow, the podcast.
Yeah, hi there and welcome to this week's episode of Cow, the podcast, number 19, Why Philosophy Works and the Question You Need to Be Asking. I'm Ant Biggs and I'll be your host for the next 15 minutes or so, talking about me, metaphor and mind, what philosophy tells us about recent findings in the cognitive sciences, and how it makes for an effective self-help tool, how individual empowerment opens up freedom of choice and encourages dialogue, and ultimately, what we should do about it, the question we could all benefit from answering. I've come to realize that philosophy is really the ultimate self-help method. Many self-help methods, with their promise of answers, wind up being nothing more than another distraction, another framework or setup, keeping you in a constant loop of more and more unnecessary consumption, stuck on the wheel. But not philosophy. Philosophy doesn't give you any answers. Instead, it gives you the power to ask questions, to ask who we are, what we are, and why. What's the point? It covers everything. And whatever you call it, it can be found everywhere, with its different positions, assumptions, and conclusions. And yes, you can get yourself stuck in an ideological cul-de-sac just like you can in religion or in science if you try hard enough. But it's not a requirement. You needn't rule out reason or emotion or intellect, because with philosophy, anything goes. I say philosophizing can change the world. And here's why. I say that to philosophize is simply to be who you are. But to do that, you need to question everything. And when you do that, when you take up that challenge, you become strong. And when you're strong, things happen. You make them happen. No one else can. So accepting the call might be the most important thing you ever do. And this is not about finding the right guru and being led step by step into the light. This is about embracing a process, a conversational dialogue maybe, that allows you to take on new ideas, to test and challenge your old ones and to make choices, to be wrong, but to make changes, all from a position of strength. Here's something: science, these days, can make pictures of the inside of our heads in real time. We can see what our brains are doing in there. And what we see are networks of meaning, different areas all linked up and connected, all firing up as we talk, and we see and we feel and we do. To run, for example, in your mind, if we watch someone think about running, we see a network of linked up areas getting hot, and we see the same thing, whether we're actually running or just talking about running. And even when we watch someone else running, the words and the actions and the sensory systems all fire together. In our minds, they're the same thing. That's the science. And what philosophy can tell us about this is that we create a map of reality within our heads as individuals, encoding it all in a wrapper or a filter of metaphor. And ultimately, we are not equipped to process the whole of reality as it happens in real time. Our minds are too slow, wet, and messy. But we can begin to understand that metaphor is fundamental to our being. We couldn't conceive of reality without it. Here are two metaphors we can use to talk about life. How about we say it's an orange, for example? Life is an orange. Now, whatever you might personally think about an orange, however you might have mapped that external phenomenon that you and I might be able to come to some form of existential consensus about, I'm willing to bet that as a metaphor for life, it isn't doing so well. But we can instead say life is a journey with travel, movement, discovery, with danger and jeopardy. Come aboard. Now that does compute. Here's another personal favourite: life as a river, a cool and powerful flowing stream of water. Now here we really get going. The river is in constant flux. It's unstoppable. To hold it back is to tempt overwhelming catastrophe, a broken dam. We know there'll be waterfalls and rapids, sharp rocks and steep banks. There will be peril. But yes, of course, there will also be overhanging branches to reach out for, fallen trees to cling onto, and calm pools to rest in. To go with the river, to flow with it, is to be carried towards freedom, towards new beginnings. To be carried downstream, where the banks open out and the waters slow, where ultimately we reach the ocean, is to reach a land of untold riches and reward. Now, this is a deeply held metaphor, and we can express all of life's richness within it. We are sharing common experience here, my brain and yours, firing in unison to understand life. But make no mistake, this isn't real. This is an idea that life is a river. This is a metaphor. Life is life. But now bear in mind that how we behave is inextricably bound up in those same metaphors, in the same packages of chemical messages that we have in our minds. We behave accordingly. I like to think that our answers ultimately become our behaviors. How deep you go in that's a personal decision, but to unpack this idea that behavior is an expression of our belief systems, maybe time for a little bit more science. Let's say stuff happens, that is, our minds receive an input, and our minds want us to react, that is, after all, why they are here. Now, our minds have previously, and they are constantly filtering and selecting and processing these constant inputs into fundamental neural networks or cognitive linguistic frameworks, into metaphors for just such an occasion. And the mind will treat this new input just the same. But first and foremost, there's no time for that real-time processing and reacting stuff. Mind knows to ask a different question and to get an answer quick. It's evolution that we have to thank for this. I mean, after all, this could quite easily be a life-threatening moment, and how can we know otherwise? We haven't thought about this yet. So mind asks, should I run from this? Is this a threat? What's happening? It has to be this way to ensure survival. Determine the risk first, only then ask, can I eat this, or can I mate with it? Or should I need to protect this? What does this new piece of information mean to me? And to reach a decision, our minds commission a process that will find the closest metaphor they have, the best fitting description of a situation that they already recognize, that they already have stored away, to match the input that comes in anew. And to do so, they request more input to confirm the situation. This is the very root of confirmation bias, our minds directing us to see what we want to see or need to see, or to hear or to feel, at a purely subconscious level, in order to make sense of the jigsaw. Here, that smell is new, for example. That smell is good. I smell food. My left cheek feels cool, breeze, scent. There's a bakery I will eat. There's the door. I mean, here it's simple enough, the smell of bread, the feeling of hunger and walking to the door, but so too is this an explanation of how all behavior is built, building layer upon layer of meaning and understanding, layer upon layer of metaphor over eons of evolutionary survival training. We see an unconscious process of chemical feedback loops underpinned by our metaphorical value system of logic and emotion, evolution and socialization, all just outputting simple robotic behaviors for the process of living itself. To see the importance of metaphor here, it's perhaps easier to understand that emotional appeal of the metaphor of life as a journey or as a river, and the intimate connection for us of life in terms of water, the myriad reflected faces we see in that water, the life experiences we describe with that same metaphor. To return to it, to continue the point here, let's just step back, just briefly from the river bank, away from the torrent with its depths and shallows and currents, and take to a cliff top high above, with gorse clinging to bleached yellow sandstone, and where looking down through a canopy of trees, we can hear a deep rumbling, and feel the chill breeze on our faces, and where we can see the mud-rich waters churning far below. from here, this new vantage point, we can see the river anew, and we can perhaps acknowledge that wherever we choose to observe this same river from, it will do its own thing. It continues to go on with its thing wherever we see it from, and whilst we might get different views of it and be minded to make different descriptions of it, we can't see it all, and we never will. We experience only our own unique perspective. The trick is to recognize that truth must be elsewhere. And as with life, so with philosophy. Plato, Spinoza, Descartes, Lao Tzu, Nietzsche, you name it. Philosophers throughout the ages have pointed out one by one to each and every one of us to say, this is up to you. It's you who has the ability to make a difference, to be who you are, and to be responsible for yourself. Each in their own way has laid down their challenge to you. And it's only you that can do this. It's only you who may know that your experience of that same river, and mine, will depend on what we choose for ourselves, on where we choose to stand. We are ultimately free. One question for me remains. And that is how we might decide what we might do with that freedom. And I'm aware that some people might want to turn away as soon as hear the word philosophy. Obviously not you guys, because you're still listening. And others might want to reject this idea of the accuracy of metaphor. And I'm aware that some might prefer other ways of marking time and find much more appeal in stuff other than saving the world. Each to their very own, I guess. But the point is that whatever you may want to call this love of knowledge, this process of discovery, this quest to take responsibility for your own path, seems to me to be the largest part and parcel of leading a full and productive life. So I have a question for you, and it's not a rhetorical question. Of course, the key to answering it is to understand that there can be no right answer, but that it is the beginning of the discussion rather than the end, and that without any hint of irony, this is precisely the answer that the planet and your children need to hear. Suppose you wake up tomorrow morning and it's you in charge. What is the first thing you would do? I'd love to hear your comments. Pop by Cal the Podcast, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.